Welcome everyone to AMSPA Presents, a series of videos produced by the Algonquin Maple Syrup Producers Association. I'm your host, Michael Levitan. In this episode, we will hear from several award-winning, very successful producers in their use of tubing and vacuum in their sap collection and handling. We'll also hear some of the challenges faced in Northern Ontario. Let's meet our producers.
So welcome everyone, we're at Bill Hubbart's Sugarbush and Sunridge. We're going to talk about mainline sizing, slope, and some sort of rules to go by when you're installing tubing and mainline. So here we have 1-inch diameter mainline, but there's a few rules you want to keep in mind with 1-inch line. You don't want to go farther than 1,000 feet, and optimally 600-700 taps. You want at least a 2% slope with 1-inch mainline, and with your laterals you want to sort of target 5 per lateral line. Northern Ontario, we have varied terrain. Could be flat portions, rolling rocky hills. You still want to keep that 2% on mainline and as much as you can on those 5/16 lines. Aim for 5 per lateral line. And we can talk about the lateral line. Basically, the less taps per lateral is going to mean more mainline in your bush. So to maximize vacuum at the tap hole, it really starts at the tap hole when you're tapping. So as you're coming through, say at the beginning of March, end of February, when you start tapping, you're coming to each of these lateral lines and you want to maximize that slope. So just move it up, maximize that slope down to the main line. And you're looking for nice sapwood. You're staying away from the small sap holes. You don't want to tap into stained column. So for example, we have an old hole here, well healed over. Even though it's well healed, we still have stained sapwood about 1 to 2 feet above and below. So you want to stay away from that, and also stay away from any natural defects.
Well, in northern areas with our tap counts per acre being fairly low in the topography, it's always a challenge to get the sap and air, because when a tree yielding sap, there's also some air that comes with it. You don't want the sap traveling any more than maybe 1,000 feet in a main line before it reaches a destination. So in Northern Ontario, it's even more important to use things like wet-dry systems. And what that is a system like this, where you can see there's 2 lines running through the bush, approximately 18 inches apart, maybe a foot to 18 inches apart. The bottom line is for the liquid, and the top line is for the air transfer. So the vacuum pump can overcome the vacuum in the top line without having to battle with the liquid that's in the lower line for you to get the vacuum transfer to the far reaches of your mainline system.
So here we are in my bush. We're at what we call a sap ladder. It's called a star ladder. You use an inverted star on the bottom, and you use 5/16 tubing up to the top. The vacuum levels, the vacuum pump will lift a column of sap. For every inch of vacuum, it'll lift 1 foot. So here we have a 7-foot ladder, and I'm running 27 inches of vacuum, so I have no problem lifting. there are advantages and disadvantages to a sap ladder. One of the disadvantages is I'm losing vacuum. So I have 27 inches at the top of this ladder. Down here, I might be only at 22, 23 inches of vacuum. So I lose vacuum because of the lift. Some of the advantages is there are trees past here that I wouldn't be able to get unless I put in another pump station or some type of lifter. So it's helped me to be able to tap more trees in an inexpensive way. One of the problems with a sap ladder is because there's sap in this line and sap in here all the time. At night, it all settles down and it freezes in this line. So in the morning when the sap starts to run, these are not running yet because they're still frozen. One of the things that I have done that helps to thaw it out is I put a bit of black pipe here, and sometimes I'll even run the black pipe out a little further. The sunlight in the morning will heat the black pipe quicker than the blue pipe, so it helps to thaw out the sap ladder in the morning to get the sap running quicker.
This is another system of Sap Lift that's available. We had put this one in back in 2013. We actually lift sap in 2 stages here. This one lifts about 12.5 feet, and it sends sap south here about 250 feet to another one, and the other unit also lifts another 12.5 feet, which actually a total lift of 25, and it gives us the ability to go over a hill that was problematic for us. This is a section that was not available to tap because of the way it drains, and once we got wind of these sap lift systems, it actually became available. We've got about 480 taps coming in here. It runs, will run 25 inches vacuum on the pump, and at the end of this season I'll be able to tell you how much vacuum I have at the end of my main lines, as we're also putting in a monitoring system.
Up here in Northern Ontario, not only do we have rolling terrain that makes it difficult to collect sap, but at least in my bush, we have a bush that's all different species. So we run from a little section of maple here, and then we run into a coniferous forest. Here we have a little bit of a low spot and a black ash swamp. Then on the far side of that, we have maple again. So, but again, the problem is here, we have a hill to go up and over to get to where we need to go. And because of that, I've added in a sap lifter. I've had this bush tapped for a number of years, and the way I done it originally before I had the sap lifter is I run an 1.25 inch main from the pump house all the way over to here to pick up these taps. If I could give you a little picture, that was the main line. It was almost flat. And basically what I've done by adding the lifter is the part that's coming from the bush, I lowered the main to get good slope, and then I've lifted this main. So the sap now runs down the main well, gets lifted up, and then down to the pump house again. Before I added the lifter, this bush would only run approximately 15 inches of vacuum. And not only that, because the main line was so flat, the sap would be laying in the main line, and as we've mentioned before, bacteria would continue to grow, and the sap would be full of bacteria, which would make much darker, stronger flavored syrup. So by taking out the flatness of the main line, adding grade to it, now the sap runs quickly to the bottom, up the sap lifter, and then continues quickly on down. So I'm getting my sap much quicker and making a higher quality of syrup. The sap lifter here, again, like the sap ladder, has advantages and has disadvantages. Advantages is I'm able to lift sap 10 feet and take it on down. Some of the disadvantages is when this fills up with sap, there's a float inside. When it comes up, it actually opens this little valve right here, which lets a tiny bit of air into this canister. This main line that's coming from the bush shuts off. The air goes in, allowing the vacuum to lift the sap 10 feet and take it on down to the pump house. The problem is, letting a little bit of air into your system brings your vacuum levels down. So every time this dumps, I'm losing about 2 inches of vacuum. And it takes a few minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, for them vacuum levels to increase back up. So this is dumping approximately, depends on the sap flow, anywhere from 3 to 6, 8 times an hour. So each time it dumps, I'm losing vacuum, it has to build back up. When the sap's running better, this dumps more. So in the hour, we'll say, the amount of time that the vacuum is low is even more. So when the sap's running good, I'm running at a lower vacuum. So that's one of the disadvantages. But saying that, I've gone from running 15 inches of vacuum in this bush to spiking at about 26 inches. So I'm running anywhere between 24 to 26 inches of vacuum. So it's way, way better than what I had before. Even though there is some vacuum loss, I've still increased my vacuum from 15 to approximately 25 inches. And we know from the research that every inch of vacuum that you can get over 15 inches increases your sap yield by 5%. So going from 15 to 25 inches, the sap yield out of this bush is 50% more. We can also talk about the health of the tree. The question has come up many times over the years by other producers, and myself included, and even the general public. Does vacuum hurt the trees? And thanks to the Proctor Maple Research Center down in Vermont, they did a study starting in 2013. It was a 5-year study, which they've extended now, to see if vacuum does hurt the trees. They took a small lot, bush lot, divided into 3 sections. The first section, they did nothing. They just left the maple trees. The second section of the bush, they tapped it without any vacuum. The third section of the bush, they tapped it with high vacuum, over 29 inches. They studied those trees for those 5 years. They did core samples measuring the growth rate of the tree, the rings. They did starch samples of the tree to see how much starch, how much sugar was in the tree. They did foliage samples and all kinds of study they did on these trees. And the conclusion of the study was there is no difference between trees that were not tapped, trees that were tapped with no vacuum, and trees that were tapped with high vacuum. So that is a tremendous thing for us as producers to know we're not hurting our trees in any way.
Today we're here at another site in the sugar bush. We're actually on the southern portion of the sugar bush, and the section of ground that we're on actually flows, drains south. So here we actually have about 430 taps that come into a lifter. It will lift sap 22 feet. It requires 25 inches of vacuum though to operate, to lift that high. You can set it up on a lower vacuum, but you would be limiting your lift. This gave us the opportunity to tap on the south end of the sugar bush without having to have another pump house and another tank. And it all comes into just one collection point, and it goes over the rise, and it'll actually go into our other extractor close to the sugar house. Benefits: you can reach accesses that you would normally wouldn't think of. So this is a new setup for us. We had star spiders before, but we were lifting at about 9 feet, and we were only running at about 20 inches of vacuum. The one downside of this extractor is that it actually needs a little bit of heat for as long as, especially when you're still pulling sap at the end of the day when it's actually turning to 0. And if your system is tight, you'll actually be pulling sap till probably about till -2 until the trees themselves freeze and your 5/16 freeze over. The other thing to remember is you need capacity at your vacuum end of your system, because it does let air into the system when you're actually lifting sap. So to make sure that your pump is actually big enough to have the CFMs to be able to operate the system. We keep our pump houses open. They're closed off to the south but open to the north. In our mind, it gives us better sap quality, keeps it fresh, keeps it cool. This station here has a 1,700 gallon tank. It used to give us the ability to actually just pump it over to the sugar shack at night, but since we've added on taps, and we actually have to come midday, and again send it off at the end of the day. If anybody would be going down that avenue again, I would recommend either a bigger tank or a continuous sap transfer.
So we're at one of the remote pump stations. It's a shipping container. We like to use the shipping containers in the bush because they're sturdy and they can withstand the impact of a tree falling on them, etc. So, and the other thing is be a little bit more of a permanent structure. So we can run, in this case, we're 1 kilometer from any hydro source. We have a 3-inch line that runs in to provide the vacuum. So the vacuum pump is out at the road, but the electricity is back here. We have a small cable with about 30 amps of electricity that will run our light and our heats and our transfer pumps and allows us to run the pump station remotely, all from the sugar house. Having your pump houses in shipping containers, having electricity really allows you to automate things. You can have a remote pump house with a vacuum pump that works off a gas motor, but if you can run them off electricity, then it makes it easier to automate things in the future. So in this case, we have 2 vacuum pumps. One of them runs a remote pump station that's 1 kilometer away. The other one runs this pump house and also an additional pump house that's another 1 kilometer away in a different direction. So by having the 3-inch air line running to each releaser at the other pump houses, we can run them all from here and we can control them with our monitoring system as well. So having that type of a setup really allows you to consolidate your pumps in one location, makes it easier to service, makes it easier for you to back up things, etc. And then you don't have to have your pump right beside your releaser in your tank.
So here we are back in the middle of our bush. We are approximately 1,500 feet from our main pump house. So this is a remote pump station that I put in about 3 years ago, and it runs solely on vacuum. But the vacuum pump is at my main pump station. So there's no gas motors here, there's no electricity here, other than one battery to run some lighting inside the building. I have a vacuum extractor, and it drops into a tank. And then I have a sap lifter that has a float on it. When the sap from the extractor drops into the tank, it opens up the valve, the float comes up, opens the valve, and we can see the 2 lines running out here. The top black line is vacuum that feeds this building. The blue line going back up is the sap lifting line. I'm lifting approximately 18 feet vertically, and it's about a 300 feet horizontal run, and then it's over 1,000 feet drop back down to the main pump house. Our terrain here is very rolling and hills, and so I'm not very far from the pump house. We could have a main line, but the problem is there's a hill between here and the pump house. So the only way to get the sap is either by a lifter or a sap ladder or another additional pump station. And I've found over the years that ladders and lifters do work, they just don't give you the vacuum you need. So that's why we put in the pump house. And I'm running an 1.5-inch vacuum line from the main vacuum pump. And our pump station is at the road is running 27.5 inches of vacuum. At 1,500 feet, I'm still running at 27.5 inches of vacuum. So I have no vacuum loss between the main pump house and our remote pump house. So it's worked very well for us here.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the monitoring system for sugar bush for a few minutes.
and there's many manufacturers out there. As far as I can see, they're all equal. It was a costly thing perhaps to put in, but I can honestly say that it probably almost paid for itself in the first year. Shortly after we put in the monitoring system 2 years ago, I had just started, my evaporator started to boil. It was around 12 o'clock, and at that time the hydro flickered just a little, and we started the evaporator, away we went, and I looked at my monitoring system at my tablet, and I noticed that my vacuum levels in the bush were all dropping. So I quickly come up here, and what had happened was my vacuum pump was still running, but my extractor pump, when the hydro flickered, had tripped the breaker. So without the monitoring system, I would have lost that entire day's sap. I was just starting my evaporator, I was starting to boil, I would have been there for 5 or 6 or more hours. So that day alone, I probably would have lost approximately $3,000. So that paid for over half of my system right there. That same year, near the end of the season, I had a bear come in and ripped a whole bunch of my line out. And again, that was near the beginning of the day. So I was able to see that very quickly with my monitoring system, that my vacuum levels had dropped again. Headed out to the bush, fixed what I could. 3 times that bear come back, 3 different days. So there's 3 different days that I would have lost that whole section of bush because the vacuum levels had dropped. So again, it almost pays for itself to have a monitoring system. At least it did for me. Some of the things I'm using the monitoring system for, as we can see here, this one's hooked directly to the end of a main line right here, and it is monitoring the vacuum levels in this main. And there's a second line here that runs down to the next main line. So I'm monitoring with one vacuum node, I'm monitoring 2 different main lines. So I have 8 of these nodes in the bush, and I'm able to monitor 16 different main lines all at the same time, monitor the vacuum levels in there. So I have almost my entire bush covered with 8 nodes. Some of the other functions that I'm using, I have 2 tank level sensors that tell me how much sap is in my tanks back at the pump house. The monitoring system will give you not only the level that's in the tap, it also has warning systems to tell you when that tank is nearing full or when the tank is full. So that's very good to know when I'm back at the sugar house boiling how much sap is up here at the bush. In the remote pump house, I also have a monitor in there that keeps track of the vacuum extractor in there. Each time it dumps from one side to the other, it counts those for me. So when I'm back boiling at the shed, all I need to do is look at the count. So in the morning when I start, I might have 6 counts, and it's approximately 12 o'clock. By 1 o'clock, maybe I'm up to 12 counts, so I know it's working. And I check it again at 2 o'clock, and now I'm up to 28 dumps. So I know, okay, the sap's coming in really good today. It's increasing or it's decreasing. And I know what's happening in the bush. I know that my remote pump station is staying active and it's working and it's not broke down. Without the monitoring system, I would not be able to know whether I'm getting sap, whether the extractor has froze up or something else has happened. So it's been a real benefit for me. And I can see how it would be a benefit for any producer, whether large or small. They have other features that can turn on and off vacuum pumps. They have a whole range of things that they can do, turning on pumps to pump sap from one station to another, all automatically. Or open valves and closed valve, use it to control your RO system, and many, many functions that all the companies have on their remote monitoring systems now.
In Northern Ontario, our bushes tend to be fairly spread out, low top count per acre, which makes it a bit of a challenge, and then our snow depths are high as well. So you've got, at the start of the season, quite often you've got 3 feet of snow, you've got rolling topography, you have a lot of main lines out for the number of trees that you have. So it becomes a real challenge to find the leaks and so on that you inevitably have when you first start the sap flow. So we, in Northern Ontario, a number of producers have been putting in remote monitoring systems. that would measure the vacuum levels at the end of each main line. And that feeds back to the sugar house where we can look at that information and decide where we need to go and patrol for leaks. So that's sort of one of the main things that these systems were designed for. But as they've developed, they've increased the number of things that you can do with them. In this case, we're at a pump house that we can control. It's 2 kilometers from our sugar house. But we can turn this pump, the vacuum pumps on. There are relays on the wall. One is for the vacuum pumps. So we can turn that on from the sugar house or from our phone, or we could be in another country for that matter and turn it on over the internet. And then we can monitor the level of the sap in the tank. And as the tank fills up, then we have another relay that would allow us to turn the pump on, which I'll do in a second. And when we do that, so we can activate that from the sugar house or wherever. When we do that, the pump will start and the valve here will close. So the pump will start, it'll prime the pump, and then this valve will close and it will be able to pump the sap to the sugar house. And then when we turn the pump off, the valve opens to relieve the pressure back into the tank. And again, I'll simulate it by turning it on here, but in essence, from wherever you are, you can turn this on, which activates. So that activates, you can hear the valve closing. So the valve is slowly closing while the piston pump primes. And now the sap is moving to its next destination. The pump is going away, the valve is now closed. So that at the end of the night, when things are all done, we send another signal which shuts off the pump, and you can hear the valve opening to bleed the pump line back into the tank. So with remote monitoring and the various tools that come with them, a producer in Northern Ontario is able to manage a fairly complex system of pump houses, all from his sugar house.
So now you've got your high quality sap here at the pump house. Question is now what and how to handle it? Well, you have to keep it as cool as you can, given the infrastructure that you have at your sugar shack. Here, we're not limited to heat or cold. We can maintain our temperature in this sap storage area. We're not limited to water. We have hot water here. So we have hot water to keep the tank nice and clean once it's empty. But if you have a remote setup at your own sugar bush, for example, at ours, our pump house is 2,500 feet away from our sugar shack. We have no electricity, no running water down there. So what we do at home is we use that first run of sap, that first day or so, to scrub out that stainless tank. We have a tank brush on a big long handle. We can reach all those little nooks and crannies of the tank and flush it out. You can use sap, that first flush, or if you have a good spring water at your pump station, you could use that too. So again, you want to process that sap as quick as you can because you want to keep it cool. There's natural bacteria in sap, so the longer it sits, that bacteria just keeps to grow. Sap gets cloudy and will affect the quality once you process it. Cloudy sap will make a darker grade of syrup. There's no problem with a darker grade at all. It's the quality of that grade. So it's the quality of the syrup is what you're striving for.
Our goal is to keep sap fresh, and our best way is actually to keep it current. We only have room for about 3,900 gallons of storage here at the camp, and about another 1,700 gallons out in the field, so we have to stay on top of it. Try to keep it cool. Try to keep your pump houses open. And that's all we've been doing. And again, like a broken record, it's just to keep it fresh. What comes in today, you boil. We usually try to finish up in the evening with a couple tanks of the end of the day run, which gives us the ability to fire up in the morning. We'll keep sap like that at night, but we won't keep concentrate. Whatever we concentrate will actually go through the evaporator. The other most important factor to keep sap fresh is every time you empty a tank, wash it. I don't care if I have to lose one drop from the extractor, the tank gets empty, tank gets water.